It's my pleasure now to welcome Paul Noyes from the BTO, and he's going to talk to us about working together for waders. Paul is originally from Hampshire. He studied and worked with breeding waders in Somerset, Kent, Yorkshire and across Scotland, and he now heads up an ambitious programme of works at the BTO to bridge the gap between national and local wader monitoring projects to better protect our drastically declining breeder wader populations. So a very big thank you to you, Paul, for coming to talk to us, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So as mentioned, I'm originally from Hampshire. I've worked in Scotland and Somerset and Kent, so not that familiar with Hertfordshire. But it's nice to be here and love coming to these kind of things, and nice to meet a lot of new faces and one or two old faces as well. But interesting to be invited to a talk about waders in Hertfordshire. Obviously not what you'd call a breed and wader hotspot, but hopefully it's maybe kind of an exotic talk for you in that respect. But yeah, so like I say, I came to Ornithology through the kind of regular routes, being a local bird watcher and kind of volunteering with various things, so RSPB, BTO, different groups like that. So really appreciate the importance of local bird clubs, local bird monitoring as well. So yeah, great to be amongst you guys in that respect. But on that note, obviously this talk is going to be talking through the importance of those connections with local groups, the importance of local monitoring, and the importance of the link with the local monitoring with BTO as well. So I think I'll start with, as we should always start with these kind of things, as the problem, as any work in conservation or monitoring should be problem and solution orientated. And we start with the kind of, I guess, the symptom rather than the underlying cause of the problem to begin with, but then work back through with some of the more of the causes of the problems, and then maybe look at some of the potential solutions as well. So the problem is, quite simply, as you're probably aware in Hertfordshire, that breeding waders are just disappearing from our landscape at a really drastic rate and really alarming. So I've taken curlew here as an example. It's kind of become the kind of flagship species for breeding wader conservation in the UK. But the trends are very similar across most of our common breeding waders, especially in farming. So basically, I'm being a little bit generous to myself here, but because I'm 32 years old, but in my lifetime, so from 1995 to 2020, so 25 years in that period, our curlew population has halved. So they've literally been, half the population has just gone in 25 years, which is really terrifying. And then if we look at the contraction of the distribution change as well, about 20% of the population no longer hears the song of curlew in the spring every year, which I think is a really sad state of affairs. And it's also important to note as well that our breeding wader populations are of international importance. So curlew in particular is near threatened from the IUCN rating, and also Britain holds about a third of the world's European curlew population as well, so really important populations globally. So we have an international responsibility to look after these birds. So looking at what's causing these population trends. So my colleague Angus Cook, has been published a study in 2021 looking at using nest record and ringing data from the nest record scheme and the ringing scheme as well to examine adult survival of curlew. Oh, sorry.
Microphone.
Microphone. Is it on? Oh. Is that bad?
Yeah. Yep.
I don't think it's actually a button, but anyway, it might be. It's not their battery or anything. Okay. Okay. So I'll just shout if it runs out of battery. But so we looked at Angus and his co-authors looked at adult survival and first-year juvenile survival. So this is birds that curlew that can fly but have just been born that year. So for both adult survival and first-year juvenile survival, it was about the rate that we need for a stable population. So it didn't look like there were any kind of alarm bells in terms of that's definitely.
Uncomfortable batteries if you shout.
Are you okay if I kind of shout at them?
Yeah.
So basically, as I said, adult and first-year juvenile survival doesn't seem to be the problem, but Angus and Sculf has also looked at productivity, so that's chicks per nest that survived. So they looked at that and found that productivity of curlews is about 0.5 chicks per nest. So put another way, for every 4 curlew nests in the UK, only 1 chick is getting away. So that's pretty terrifying. Obviously, breed and wader productivity is not that great generally. Life expectancy of a wader chick is not that high, but that's really, really low. So they did some fancy statistics, looked at basically what productivity we'd need, and then for a stable population, we're looking at about 0.5 chicks per nest. So to put another way, for every 2 curlew nests, we need a chick away, basically. And that's just for a stable population as well. So if we're looking to reverse the declines as well, so that we should be really, we need to not only stabilize, but reverse declines as well. So we're looking at in excess of 0.5 chicks per nest. So the problem's there. What we need to do, the challenge is pretty clear. We need to get that productivity high. So what's causing poor productivity on breeding grounds? And really, you could do a whole series of talks on this. This is a really, really complicated area, so I'm going to try and do my best to kind of encapsulate it in broad brush kind of approach. So there's a few main factors I've chosen here, and overwhelmingly the biggest factor we're all familiar with the general decline in farmland birds, is how we produce food in the UK. And that's changed a lot over the last century for many reasons, but especially in the Second World War and the post-war years, we had a lot of kind of fear around food security. We're a small island and there was a danger we were going to be starved out in the Second World War. So food production was a big, big priority for the UK government and our society as a whole. We've really prioritised, both through agricultural policy and through market forces, really prioritised higher and higher yields. So more and more land has been converted to intensive farmland. We've shifted from traditional kind of hay meadow to silage production, which can be cut earlier and more frequently throughout the season. Just technological changes have boosted this as well. So so tractors and other farm vehicles can physically move quicker. So for activities like drilling, spraying, rolling, or cutting can be done a lot quicker, which is bad news for waders as well. And then this whole intensification within farmland as well is having an effect on botanical diversity and invertebrate diversity as well, which is obviously affecting waders as their food source. And then I should say as well, these are obviously kind of inexorable forces. You know, there's not much we're going to do to change these things, but we have to work within the situation we have. Obviously, not blaming farmers at all for these actions. They're just responding to agricultural subsidies and other incentives and market forces. So. And then there's a few kind of secondary factors, but still really important. We've got greater. No. Can you still hear me okay at the back? Is that ish? I probably keep raising my voice. So we've got greater and greater afforestation in the UK as well. So over the last century, forest covers doubled, mostly through commercial forestry. But we've also got big targets for more and more afforestation in the next 25 years. And it's important to say that it's not going to be the kind of, valuable lowland agricultural land. It's not going to be the high hilltops. It's going to be these marginal upland habitats. And this is exactly where the last real breeding hotspots for waders are left. So that's a bit of a concern there. Also, just in terms of general increase in the population, and the population being more mobile, things like hiking, mountain biking, things like that, a lot of breed and wader hotspots, particularly in national parks and things like that, are being affected by increased amounts of human disturbance as well. And then finally as well, I mentioned here in terms of gamekeeping effort, that's changed a lot as well over the last century. So we went from quite a big gamekeeper workforce at the turn of the century to more towards present day with much fewer gamekeepers across the country. So they're obviously having less of a dent in their control, lethal predator control, that they would have with a lot of wader predators like foxes and crows and things like that. So it's not any one of these factors. Obviously, the food production is probably the key thing, but these factors working synergistically, so they're interplaying. So in an intensively farmed landscape, it's better suited for generalist predators, and then if we're having less lethal predator control, more afforestation, they're all obviously playing into this. So what do these factors look like on the ground for waders? So we've established that productivity is the issue. That's what we need to address. And there are two key stages for waders. There is the nest period and the chick rearing period as well. So they have to get through both of these periods if we're going to get those chicks away, one chick per 2 nests away for curlew, but we need similar rates for the other species, other breeding wader species as well. So in the nesting period, farm operations, so the stuff I was talking about, that kind of drilling, cutting, spraying, we need to make sure that's not destroying nests in that period. But the flip side of that as well is obviously waders are dependent on farmland. They're grassland, the declining waders are grassland birds. So we need to make sure that the farming is beneficial for them, the sward height and things like that is suitable for their breeding as well. So it can be a positive, it can be a bad thing, but we need to manage that in the right way. And then likewise, we need to make sure nests are not being eaten by predators. So like I said, foxes and crows and other mesopredators, we need to make sure the nests are surviving that period. And then in the chick rearing period, same factors are at play, but then we've also got the added issue of obviously eggs don't need to be fed, but chicks need to eat and to get to the point where they've got powered flight as well. So they basically, they need to make, so things like curlew, curlew chicks have not developed those longer bills, so they need to glean insects and other invertebrates from the ground and from vegetation. So we need to make sure not only that they hatch, that there's enough food and they're not being killed as well with the other options. So for the BTO, our challenge, obviously we collect data, we monitor birds. Our challenge is to work out what's happening on breeding wader grounds as well, to work out what's going on. So we need to collect data on the land management practice that I was talking about, that's the issue here. So working out what's going on the ground in breeding wader habitats. Looking at the determining factors, so the actual incidence of chicks and nests being destroyed, and then be that through farm operations or predators, so we need to get data on predator abundance, and we need good data on invertebrate abundance and diversity as well, so making sure that chicks have enough food as well as they're not being killed. And then we need good data on wader populations as well, so we need to monitor the effect this management is having and monitor the outcomes when we have conservation interventions to help waders as well. So I'm going to start, obviously we have to try not to put the cart before the horse. We're still at the stage where we need to get better data on wader populations as well. So I'll start with that, the bird data. And the data currently available, these are kind of big national monitoring schemes that I'm sure a lot of you in the room will be aware of and will contribute to. So anyone who has contributed to any of these schemes, big thank you from the BTO here. So we've got BBS, WEBS, and that's the ringing scheme there, the nest record scheme at the bottom there, and then we've got these kind of one-off intermittent surveys for waders. So Bird Atlas is obviously all species, but including waders, and then breeding waders of wet meadow is just for waders. And these give us lots of, like I said, these have been absolutely crucial for informing conservation. So the trends that I talked about at the start of the talk, that's based on BBS data, and then the productivity that I was talking about as well is based on ringing and nest record scheme data as well. So these data sets are absolutely crucial. So thank you again to anyone who's contributed to them. What they do lack is when you get to finer and finer geographical resolutions, they really struggle. So for example, in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, with an area where I work quite regularly, they really struggle to provide, to generate trends for curlew and lapwing because they just don't have the sample sizes with the BBS squares available in the park. So it makes it really difficult when we want to start really drilling into what's happening on the ground for waders and what we can do to help them. We don't have that kind of resolution from these national data sets, as important as they are. So that's an issue. There's also the issue, as we talked about, is a lot of these schemes are monitoring adult abundance, and that doesn't give us the whole picture because we need to know how many chicks are getting away each year, so we need to have an idea of productivity. And that's a big issue as well because waders are long-lived birds, so we can't actually, if we're just monitoring adult abundance, we might have a 10 or 20 year delay before the actual real effects of the low productivity is showing. So obviously the ringing scheme and nest record scheme can give us those, can give us productivity, but they're quite localized, they're quite highly skilled things. Wader nest finding is very hard. obviously ringing is skill dependent as well, so you need to have trained for a long time to become a ringer. Wader ringing schemes tend to be quite localised and specific to certain areas, so we need to develop ways to monitor productivity across the country on a consistent way as well. So there's a lot of challenges, and we need more data sets. The good news is there is an opportunity, and this is a Curlew Forum meeting. So this was in Slimbridge in last November, and it's a bit similar to this, I guess. Oh, brilliant. Hello? Do you want me to restart from the start? So this, I guess, is quite similar to this meeting in a way. It's just people who are really enthusiastic about birds getting together, discussing what needs to be done. And these people basically go out, spend a lot of their spring and summer going out and monitoring curlew in particular, but other waded species as well. And they'll be talking to farmers. They'll be often putting up electric fences to predator-proof around nests as well. So they're doing a lot of things, a lot of good things. But at the moment, we're kind of failing them on the front of the data side of things, because all of this data that they collect is staying within the projects and is not going into national monitoring schemes, which is a real shame. And that means two really important things. One, they're not being represented on a national scale, their data, all of the populations that they're monitoring. So when it comes to things like local planning or national planning and conservation decision making, there are a lot of the time lots and lots of hard work in terms of monitoring for breeding waders in the local area is actually going to nothing in that respect. And then secondly, as we've been talking about, we need to work out what's going on the ground, what effect different land management actions and conservation interventions are having on waders. Their data is not going towards that as well. So there's a bit of a gap in the market there. And if the monitoring and land management loop is working correctly, like I say, if we start with local naturalists and local monitoring people like yourselves, ideally this is being fed through to environmental NGOs, through citizen science schemes, and then the environmental NGOs and academia, and they can then feed that to the government. We can then make informed decisions about things like agri-environmental schemes or other incentivization to farmers. Farmers can then adapt their management based around that and hopefully manage landscape better. That can then be monitored again from local naturalists, and then it creates this kind of virtuous loop and virtuous cycle where we're better managing habitat for waders. But what we've got at the moment, like I say, those people going out day in, day out, monitoring their waders, there's not that link with them on the ground, on their how they monitor their waders. So we've lost that link between the local wader monitorers and environmental NGOs. So that puts a strain on all of these relationships. So obviously environmental NGOs are not giving the best information to governments. Governments are then not designing the best schemes for farmers. They're then finding that frustrating, and land, and the key part of this as well as land is not being managed better for waders. And then this is also putting a strain on local land managers and local naturalists when that data isn't being fed through. So obviously at BTO we're really keen to address this. This is why my post was fundraised for and set up, and what I've been working on in the last couple of years. And we've done a lot of research into what monitoring local groups are doing. And because there's not been any kind of clear guidance or any citizen science scheme in the past, there's been quite a proliferation of different methods. So people are having to do things their own way on the ground. There's lots and lots of different methods, but we do think that kind of boils down to two different methods. So we've got surveys, which again, you'll all be quite familiar with the concepts. Bird surveys, just going out, recording the birds you see, making estimates on populations based on that. And then, as well, a lot of groups will be actively finding nests, pinning down pairs, monitoring the nesting attempts and the brood survival as well, so looking at fledgling and hatching success as well. So there's lots of different methods, but we have been down to about 7 different methods that we think will cover the majority of local breeding wader monitoring. And the surveys are grouped into 2 main groups as well. So we've got censuses, which are methods that a few of you might be familiar with, which is kind of based around lowland wader surveys, upland wader surveys. There's a Curlew-specific wader survey as well. And then we've also developed BTO survey for farmers to provide weekly counts for their waders. And then there's a couple of transect surveys as well that are used in local wader projects. So we're confident that with all of these methods, we can provide guidance to support local groups with these, but also to kind of standardise the data collection that it could then feed into a system we've termed the Wader Information Hub. That sounds quite a kind of nebulous concept at this stage. Obviously, it's hard to get to describe these kind of things, but at its heart, it's quite simple. We're basically just providing guidance for each of these 7 methods. We're just going to provide guidance on a web page or set of web pages, and then so that's going to be about using these methods and what they can provide, and when and where you use them best, and things like that. And then each of these guidances will then feed towards a citizen science project, so that they can go and collect data in a standardised way, provide that back to the Wader Information Hub, which then, like I say, NGOs like us can analyse and report upon, and then update the guidance not only for the monitoring as well, but also crucially for land management practice and things like that as well. So that's what we're aiming to get this month. Is actually we're going to be launching the first phase of the Wader Information Hub, so that'll be live towards the end of this month. So I recommend going on that if you're interested in that tool, go down on that when that's live at the end of the month. So each of those methods are basically, the analogy I like to give is basically going to be like a toolbox. So if you're interested in doing any, helping out with waders in your local area, there's these 7 methods that you can look at, choose which is best for you, and then decide what you're going to use. And we've got guidance along in terms of decision making, what you can do, what's the best method for you type thing. So these are, as I mentioned, the wader censuses we're going to support as well, and then we're working with the Curlew Recovery Partnership in England to develop their monitoring guidance and provide data entry systems for that. We've got the Wader Calendar, which is a farmer survey, which is just simple, literally a calendar, a simple A4 sheet of paper, and then that allows them to put weekly estimates for the waders they've observed on their farms. And we've been working with 12 farms in the Yorkshire Dales on this, and using bioacoustic monitoring as well with that, and then getting volunteers to check farmers' counts, and it's been really, really promising so far, the data that farmers are collecting. They often know the wildlife on their farm a lot better than anyone, including bird surveyors who turn up for a couple of hours on it. So yeah, it's really a lot of opportunity in that respect as well. So, and we're also looking at ways that we can develop BDS further to help out waders. Like I say, there's an issue in terms of sample sizes when it comes to local geographical areas, even big national parks and also big breeding wader hotspots like the Yorkshire Dales struggle to get those sample sizes. So there might be options about augmenting that with additional BBS squares. We'd also like to put a big shout out to the additional BBS breeding wader visits as well, which I work on. And that's just basically an extra visit as well as after you were late or just before, just an additional visit as well as your early and late visits to record the behaviour and presence of young for waders as well. And that's really going to help us develop these productivity indexes which help us examine productivity on a landscape scale as well. And then if you're not up to BBS through whether, with the bird ID or with the methodological rigour of that, we've also got a more lightweight transect option called breeding wader transects. And then we're also looking at ways to get people more involved in wader nest monitoring. So developing guidance around finding wader nests, and then different projects, like we've worked on a project in Scotland, the Nest Camera project, so that we've actually provided trail cams in post to farmers, other land managers and other stakeholder groups, and got them out putting cameras on the nests, and that's been a really, really kind of rewarding thing. And that, in terms of engagement, that gets people really involved, and they can actually watch the nesting attempt play out before their eyes, and all the kind of trials and tribulations of that, and potential predation and things like that. It's really, really interesting. So if we go back to our the virtuous feedback loop, like I say, the Wader Information Hub will be plugging that gap that there is between local naturalists and environmental NGOs. But then, as I mentioned, with the Wader Calendar and the breeding wader transects, there's actually a potential that land farmers and keepers and other land managers can actually directly get involved in the monitoring as well. So we're actually creating new links as well, and then they can feed this data directly back to the government as well. So actually, potentially, reduces the need for that kind of analysis as well. So lots and lots of potential here. And the whole idea behind this is kind of develop this adaptive management approach. And this is quite common in different parts of the world, but not so much in the UK so far. So the concept with this is we have local monitoring, so you're setting up your kind of baseline monitoring, so this is citizen science schemes. They're working with local land managers to record what's happening on the ground for waders, so populations, but ideally productivity as well. And then they're feeding that to the Wader Information Hub through citizen science projects, where we can analyse and report on this and update guidance both for the monitoring back to the local monitors, but like I say, crucially to land managers to impact real change for management on the ground. And then we can monitor the change in land management using the same local monitoring and those citizen science schemes, and then feedback what works, when, where, when and why. So we're kind of developing this positive feedback loop between local monitoring and land management as well. So that's it kind of in a nutshell. Obviously 2023 we just got to the point where we're developing our toolbox for breeding waders, so just the wader data itself, and that's taken obviously a long time just to get to that point. As I mentioned at the start of the talk, though, obviously a huge area of development we're going to have to work on is getting more and more detailed information on the breeding success of waders, but also more and more detailed information on land management and predator abundance, invertebrate abundance and diversity as well. And we're really going to have to rely on our partner organisations there as well, so this is kind of a new area for the BTO in terms of developing data collection protocols for management and mammals and invertebrates and things like that. So we do have partner organisations in the Curlew Recovery Partnership in England, but also in Working for Waders in Scotland. So a few of those organisations, especially the RSPB and GWCT, are a bit more familiar with those kind of things. We're going to have to lean upon them to develop these methodologies as well. So that's kind of the challenge in the future for 2024 and beyond. Because like I say, in this first year, in 2023, it's just going to be wader data that we're focusing on as well. So in terms of those future challenges as well, I'm going to put a particular shout out again to the additional BBS visits as well, for breeding wader visits, whereas the URL up on the screen, you should be able to get to all the recording forms and instructions that you need there as well. But also, I do have, at the BTO stand at the back, we've got materials for the breeding wader visits as well. Admittedly, in Hertfordshire, probably very few BBS squares, sadly, that have breeding waders, but if you do, please consider taking part in these additional visits. So, to sum up, this is obviously, hopefully I've conveyed, it's not going to be an overnight thing, this is going to be a long road. We're going to have to work with local projects really closely. But the BTR are in it for the long run. Obviously, we always need funding, but in terms of strategy, we're really keen to develop this model, this kind of adaptive management model. And then it's also really crucial to note that obviously every aspect of this is going to have to involve working together. So obviously, BTO can't do this alone. We're really going to be crucial. It's going to be crucial to have the involvement not only of the local groups that I was talking about, with the Curlew Forum and other kind of local groups such as yourselves, but also our partner organisations as well. So all of the partner organisations in the Curlew Recovery Partnership and Working for Waders. We're not going to be able to do this alone. So yeah, we need the help there. But then the final point I just wanted to make as well is it's actually really crucial that there's no reason why this model couldn't be applied to other bird groups, but also potentially other taxa as well. So if we develop this model and it works well and we've got kind of an adaptive management approach, there's lots and lots of potential for other species as well. So that's all kind of in theory, so I thought I'd give just one really quick kind of case study as well. So I mentioned the Nest Camera project in Scotland. So this was a really interesting project, one of my favourite projects I've worked on. So basically in Scotland in 2020, obviously we had a lot of land managers, so farmers and gamekeepers were really keen to demonstrate the issues facing wader nests, but they couldn't do because there was no way they could do that. So we had a bit of funding through Louisa Yannicka, who managed to purchase about 30 nest cameras, and we posted these out to gamekeepers, farmers, but also academics and NGOs as well. So across the country, 30 nest cameras went out in Scotland, and we provided guidance on this in terms of setting up the cameras. We also provided guidance on data collection as well and what to record. And we were really, the first year, obviously we got quite a lot of records, but in 2022 we were especially taken aback that we actually managed to get 62 nest records across Scotland, which is put into context of the amount of wader nests generally submitted through the Nest Record Scheme. That's a really high proportion of that, so it was a really, really big success story. Obviously we had the usual instances of predators, so things like corvids, foxes, badgers as well. We had as well in a few mustelid instances of mustelid predation and hedgehogs as well. But the thing that really surprised us about this was actually the amount of rate of sheep predation we had in the wader nests as well. So this is obviously lapwing on the left here, an oystercatcher on the right. I think out of the 62 nests, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, there's around about 8 instances of sheep predation of wader nests as well. So we're not sure, we're still finishing on the analyses and reporting of that, so I'm not sure how representative that is. Obviously that could have come from just near enough to sheep fields alone, but it does show that at least in certain circumstances this is the real problem. And they did seem to actually be attracted to the wader nests rather than just coming across them and grazing. So it's obviously some kind of dietary supplement that the sheep are looking for with that. So that was really surprising, but the good thing about that was actually it surprised us a bit as well, but it also surprised the farmers. So we didn't actually need to go to that towards that kind of virtuous feedback loop that I was talking about. The farmers directly saw it, and then quite often we're thinking about how when they put sheep in fields and thinking how they might change it directly as well. So that was really interesting. Obviously sometimes there's nothing they can do, they need to put sheep in certain fields, but there's quite often small changes that they can make. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I would take from involving land managers and involving everyone and working together really in that respect. But I've got one more video which is, I almost feel like I should put a content warning on this. It's really quite harrowing. This is an instance of a hedgehog predation of a curlew nest, and curlew will do this kind of like wailing call. I mean, they sound quite mournful at the best of times, but they do a kind of wailing call when the nest has been predated, which you'll see. But yeah, this was a really interesting bit of footage that was caught through that nest camera project. This is just in the daytime showing the nest earlier, but the predation at night. Leave it there, but so yeah, it's obviously quite a mournful call, and it also, I mean, really, again, those kind of videos, it just shows what we're up against in terms of improving wader productivity. There's just so many challenges that face nests, but also if you're I wouldn't like to be a wader chick. It's, you know, you have to face a lot of challenges to get to fledgling. So I'll leave it at that, but I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm more than happy to talk through it. It was kind of a whistle-stop tour as well, so realised we're doing, that was kind of a broad brush approach, but if anyone has any questions and wants a bit more details about anything, you know, I'm ready. Do you want to pass the screen? Yeah,
The sheep predation, were they eating the eggs, trampling the eggs, or eating the chicks?
Eating eggs in the instances, yeah. So the cameras were only on nests, so obviously a brood will hang around the nest for a couple of days after hatching, but after that point we've got no, we didn't have any data on broods, so we don't know, but I mean it's unlikely. I would have thought that sheep are, then again, I was surprised before, so I'm cautious about saying these things. Unlikely they're predating chicks, much more likely eggs, but yeah, definitely eating them. There are instances of trampling as well, so obviously that's a bigger issue with cattle, with trampling as well, and that depends on the breed as well. So dairy cattle were a lot more active, a lot more risk of trampling, but sheep, it did look very much like they knew what they were doing and they were aiming for the nests kind of thing. So yeah, it could be a real issue, and the RSPB in Scotland is doing a lot of work around that as well, and looking at different solutions and trying different solutions around that as well. So yeah, I think Does that answer your question?
If a nest is predated, will they go for a second brood?
Yeah, so that depends on a lot of different factors. So it depends at what stage in the breeding season it's predated. So the earlier it is, the more likely they are to relay something. It also depends a bit on the species. So certain species are more likely to relay than others. But yeah, generally they'll try again if it's early enough in the season. So yeah.
Apologies if I missed it when we nipped out, but did you touch on the, because you're doing some work I think in East Anglia particularly, about taking eggs from nests at risk and hatching on, particularly Marham and various places like that?
Yeah, so I didn't cover that. That's not really within my work programme. That is an area that BTO, so my colleague Sam Franks works on this at BTO as well. So you're talking about head starting.
Yeah, how's that going?
Well, I think it's too soon. I think I'd say the jury's out basically in that. It's obviously, it's going to be a tool within the box, you know, within what that we have to available in terms of conservation. But the numbers that we're talking about for head starting, the numbers of birds we're likely to get into the population, if we're looking at the numbers that we need to improve productivity right across the country, if we're talking about, within every 2 curlew nests needing the chick gone, we're probably not going to, from head start, and make much of a dent in that population. So it's a tool, and I think the jury's out on how, if it's worth the amount of money, because it's also really, really expensive to do. So the jury's still out, but I think it could be a part of the solution as well. So kind of too soon to say, but also likely going to be helpful. So did that answer your question?
Yeah.
No.
Can I just ask? You mentioned the Wader Hub website.
Yeah.
So I probably might have missed it, but what would we find if we go on that?
Yeah, so that's really so that's crucial. So you'll find a set of guidance documents. So basically, it's set up so that if you're somebody who's interested in local Wader monitoring, you can go on there, and there's basically all the resources you need. It will walk you through what methods do what, and what you can get out of each of those methods, and also then give you guidance on completing those methods as well, and then the data entry systems that can support that as well. So basically guidance and projects. We're doing it kind of traditionally like how the BTO have always done this kind of thing with kind of our monitoring projects, where we have survey instructions, a data entry system that you can return that data. So we're not reinventing the wheel in that respect. It will basically be doing that, just with newer projects and newer methods.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Sorry about that.